Hello and welcome everyone, I'm Ari Lax, and this week I'm bringing you the hot and fun deck off of last weekend's SCGTour stop in Orlando, and that is Tom Ross's 8-rack deck that he piloted to a top 8 finish. So this is kind of derivative of the POC strategies that people have. I don't want to say derivative even, that's not even the right word. It's just the latest iteration of the POC strategy that people have been playing for 20 years now, 21 years, forever. And basically, all you're trying to do is exchange resources with your opponent and then play a couple things that are good at killing them once you've reached that state. So those cards are Shrieking Affliction and the Rack and Mutavault. These are all things that that dodge traditional creature removal, that don't let your opponent really exchange for them in a lot of convenient ways. And once you've exchanged for a lot of cards, the Rack is going to deal 2 to 3 damage a turn. This is going to deal 3 Mutavault, ship away at 2. You actually close reasonably fast. And you're fueling these via the strong 1-mana discard spells that are good in Modern. So Inquisition of Kozilek and Thoughtseize really need no introduction in this format. Funeral Charm is a card that it's shown up from time to time in various lists, but there's a lot of utility to it. You can force the exchange. You can make a discard on your opponent's upkeep so that your opponent, if they're hellbent, draws their card and immediately discards it. You can kill small creatures with it. And then there's some marginal modes that you can pump your Mutavault to a 4/1 or give it Swamp Walk so that when you have Urborg on the battlefield, you actually have to attack through for lethal in some weird spots. And then you have Raven's Crime, which is probably one of the more important cards in the deck. Raven's Crime lets you exchange a full category of your deck that normally is pretty bad at exchanges. Which just opens up a lot of flexibility in how you execute your game plan. And even though it's a bad rate to start, having the first one is just so important. You have to have 4. Moving up the curve, you have Wrench Mind, which is a 2-for-1 most of the time, and you sideboard out when they have artifacts to discard to it. And then Smallpox, which is your most powerful attrition engine. It just straight up trades 3 cards for 3 cards on its own. And often, sometimes you can just straight up cripple anyone who's playing Noble Hierarch with this card. Smallpox is very, very powerful. And it's one of the reasons this deck wants to draw first. Is because you're capable of forcing this massive exchange. And you want to give your opponent as many opportunities as possible to put a creature on the battlefield to get Smallpox. You then have Dismember to handle creatures, aside from with Smallpox. And then, this is the most efficient thing you can really do. And then you have Liliana the Veil. Again, another way to handle creatures, but also a way to, again, force these exchanges. And secretly a little bit of a win condition. If you tick it up to 7 and then -6 it and just repeat over and over, eventually your opponent's going to run out of permanents on the battlefield in addition to cards. And once they're at this point where they just don't have any resources and you're just whittling their stuff away, they can't actually kill you. So you will eventually win the game. It's a very soft lock, but it's an additional form of inevitability. Delightful mana base, a bunch of swamps. Magic Online has selected a wonderful mix of things from all sorts of sets for me today. I'm not going through the effort of finding... Ooh, is that just a singleton full art one? I really hope it is. If I really wanted to, I would have gone through and found 16 different ones, but not quite what I want to spend my time on. But there's also 4 Urborg, so one of the costs of playing with Mutavault with your double black spells is some mana issues sometimes, so you have maximum amount of Urborgs for that. And at the same time, you also have Raven's Crime, Smallpox, and Liliana to expend your extra Urborgs, so they're not just completely dead. They're exactly as dead as whatever you would have discarded or sacrificed was. Moving to the sideboard, we have Waste Not for decks that are discarding their own cards so that, with Faithful Suiting is a charm or whatever, so you can churn through stuff. You have Asylum Visitor. This is a reasonably sized threat. If you need to clock someone, it trades for opposing creatures, and just the additional cards and matchups where you need to churn through stuff a little more quickly. Pretty important. If you watch Tom's winning in this last weekend, he uses this card pretty effectively against Burn. And then Death Shadow, another card against Burn or aggressive strategies. You can stabilize the board with your attrition, slam a big Death Shadow, and close quickly. Deathmark in the hate stack. Pretty obvious, it kills green and white creatures when you need to kill green and white creatures. Not a lot to it. Disfigure if you need to kill small creatures. Just cards that are good at forcing exchanges. Flaying Tendrils if you need to mop up a lot of creatures, for example, Affinity. Knight of Soul's Betrayal to KO the decks that have 1 toughness creatures. Again, Affinity. In fact, Tom mentions Bogles because it clears out the non-enchanted Bogles, and then you can Smallpox and Liliana away the bigger ones. And then some Graveyard Hate because discard not the best against the decks that are 100% trying to discard their own spells. Leyline of the Void is the most powerful, but having multiples of it leads to a lot of drawing it later on. This is kind of a very Jerry T thing to do, is have one Leyline and a couple other hate cards. I'm not 100% sure on the logic, but it does well enough that I'm not going to mess with it. So this week we're going to be having some fun, and hopefully our opponents have relatively little of it.